Okay, good morning, everyone, and a very, very happy Yom Yerushalayim. We are so deeply grateful to the great diplomat, Rabbi Aryeh Lightstone, a dear friend who's joining us really on his Erev Shabbos, very close to Shabbos, not the most convenient time, and yet a further reflection of his devotion to the U.S.-Israel relationship, to celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, to our community, and another example of deep friendship to me. So for that, Rabbi Lightstone, welcome. Thank you. We're so appreciative for your time.
Thank you for having me, and any chance I can to elongate Yom Yerushalayim is a big win for me. So I appreciate both you and everybody else who's tuned in. We all know this Erev Shabbos time can be dead time. This is a chance to enhance it into something more special.
Amazing, amazing. Aryeh and I have known each other for a long time and in a lot of different capacities. For those watching, Aryeh is an incredibly talented individual, an entrepreneur who has built successful business, a educator who through NCSY really transformed some of the opportunities for teens and for young people, a politically astute advisor who was close to Marco Rubio in the Rubio presidential campaign, and now as a senior advisor to Ambassador Friedman at the embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Aryeh continues to bring his wisdom and his work and really impact an area, an arena so near and dear and precious to all of us. So as I said, it's great to have you and it's great to be in conversation together. Maybe begin by telling us what Yom Yerushalayim is like in Israel. What was your day like and what's left of it?
It started yesterday at, pardon me, at 12:45. I looked at my watch and I had an hour and a half gap in between meetings, which happens these days much more frequently than it did obviously pre-COVID-19. And we now have actually two embassy locations in Jerusalem. Just 2 years ago, we used to use the King David porch as more or less our home base in Jerusalem. And now we've got our embassy, 14 David Flusser Street in Arnona, that you were at on May 14th, just 2 years and a couple days ago. And also 18 Gershon Agron Street, which is probably more well-known to the people watching and listening, which is on the path now to the Waldorf, right sort of behind the King David. You saw the American flag, but most of the participants here in this specific webinar probably never went in or felt that it was related to them. That's been our American consulate in Jerusalem since 1847, if memory serves. You can read Michael Oren's book. He actually outlines the history of the consulate, but it's been a consulate for a very long time. And since the Oslo Accords served as the unofficial mission to the Palestinians in March of 2019, so just a year and a little bit ago, Secretary Pompeo said it seems crazy to have both an embassy and a consulate in the same city. Let's merge them both together. And under the guidance of Ambassador Friedman, we've now merged the consulate and the embassy together. And the entire U.S. mission in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, etc., all work for Ambassador Friedman with the embassy. So anyways, I was at that building on 18 Gershon Agron Street. Right. Discovered I had an hour and a half break in between meetings, and I decided to walk to the Kotel, something you couldn't do when our embassy was in Tel Aviv. Something you shouldn't do when it's 105 degrees outside. That was rethinking. That was not brilliant. But it was my first chance to be at the Kotel since Shushan Purim, if you can believe it. Wow. And walked through Mamila, up through the old city, and got there and began to cry. Because if you've been to the Kotel first I stopped at Asia Tower for the air conditioning, but from there in the overlook, it was tremendously moving. Normally, you'll see flags sticking out from throngs of people. Here, there were throngs of flags and no people. To walk to the Kotel, Yom Kippur Katan, the tefillah were yesterday. There were 2 minyanim going on, and lots of placards where later on that night where the official ceremony would happen, you could stand if you were one of the lucky couple thousand who were able to go there, all placed 2 meters apart. And if you've ever walked there Yom Yerushalayim, you can't walk up to the wall. So it was very blessed that I was one of the few people able to go to the wall yesterday, and very sad that I was one of the few people able to go to the wall yesterday. And today, much like Yom Ha'atzmaut, just a couple weeks ago on May 14th, the holiday that we celebrate, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, you do what you can digitally like this through Twitter and Facebook and Zoom. But it's important to keep the traditions going. We hope next year we'll be able to do it correctly and we'll be able to do it in person. So this this is probably the capstone of my Yom Yerushalayim celebration today.
Amazing. And we thank you for spending it with us. And I wanted to use the opportunity to very publicly thank Aryeh for opportunities he's given me at the White House, most recently the announcement of the very ambitious peace plan, or 2 years ago to be with you in Yerushalayim, celebrate the opening of that embassy, and even more recently than that, to appear on a video of the embassy celebrating that anniversary. These are each milestones that rank among the most memorable of my entire life, of great opportunities. And they're thanks to your friendships. I want to publicly take the opportunity to be Makir Tov, to express gratitude to you on a personal level for the opportunities you gave me, but much more broadly. Sometimes the senior advisor, chief of staff, if you will, to Ambassador Friedman. We'll talk about how you got in that role in a moment. People don't appreciate necessarily how much you've been involved behind the scenes in the last 3 years in these initiatives, whether it's the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the transfer of the embassy, or Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and the dialogue on the deal of the century today, the shuttle diplomacy. You're flying back and forth to Washington sometimes for as little as a day for those high-level meetings. But we really collectively owe you a huge debt of gratitude and a thank you for your service. It's not all fun and glory. You put yourself out there, you paint a target on yourself also in some ways, and it's a challenge to be with your family. But maybe just to start, even though we're going backwards, we should get to how you got in that role. But let's talk about the embassy move and what was behind it. I showed Aryeh, Rabbi Lightstone, right before we began. I have actually sitting on my desk a display I made after that special day that has some pictures, the invitation, the bracelet, the medallion that was given out. I look over to it often and I think about just how momentous. It was a historic day. The recognition, something we knew and almost didn't need, but nevertheless, the significance politically, the meaning of the U.S. recognizing Yerushalayim as the eternal capital of the Jewish people, and what the embassy being moved there represented. I get chills just thinking about it and talking about it. Give us a little background to it. For many years and many administrations said it couldn't be done, despite Congress approving it and voting on it. What happened differently? Obviously, we're very indebted to the whole administration and the president for making that promise a reality and following through. Give us a little bit of the backstory to it and to that day, that celebration.
Okay, so you hit on my favorite topic, so excited to do that. You mentioned before the call officially started why I wear a jacket. So the answer is in the competition for swag. I always try to win. And here you can't see it so clearly, but this is a smaller version of that. Which is, if you recognize that was actually at the embassy opening, right behind the ambassador. That was the large symbol, and the important words. I'll just move out of the way for a second. If you can see that, is Jerusalem, Israel. When the ambassador writes his book, that was one of the most impressive commas ever fought over in the U.S. government. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and that. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and the credit is the credit is the courage of the president. The president made the decision. It's also a Florida story, actually. In the very first waiver in 1995, there was the Jerusalem Embassy Act, and the Jerusalem Embassy Act required three things: passed broad bipartisan support. It required to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It required us to open up our embassy in Jerusalem, and required us to open up the ambassador's home in Jerusalem. All three of those were requirements of the law, and it was passed into law, except Congress doesn't make foreign policy. They just control the purse strings. And the penalty was, if you did not do those three things, then you could lose something like 50% of your foreign policy money, which is obviously no president can afford to do that. Except there's a waiver. There was an out, that if you signed a waiver within 6 months of the previous waiver, then you said, for national security reasons, I cannot follow the law. It's the law. The law was not debated. The law was that we have to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, move the embassy, et cetera, et cetera. That was the law. And the question why we basically were in breach of the law, and the question was why we're in breach and how we can get around doing that. So when the ambassador was originally nominated and going through the process, he had a chance to meet with many of the experts in Washington, D.C., in the government. And he led with his very first question. He said, why aren't we following the law? I mean, the waiver is on not moving the embassy, but how do you not recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? So that's the actual law. Why is that not part of the CIA maps, the official map? Why is that not something that the president has declared? It's not a waivable commitment for the law. And in asking that question, the ambassador sort of let everybody in the building know what direction he was going. And if they didn't pick up on that, they would notice his first official press release in December when he was semi-officially nominated by the president to be his ambassador. He said he looks forward to working out of his office in Jerusalem as soon as he gets there. So he laid the groundwork. But what's interesting to know is that most ambassadors, what's the purpose of an embassy? Maybe let's understand that, to understand why it matters that the embassy is in Jerusalem. Why do embassies matter? What's the relevance? So if you can imagine back before there were, fax machines, telephones, emails, Zoom, something like this, how do you communicate what your government wants to the other government? So if you can imagine in the early 1900s or the 1800s, the Emperor of Japan wants to communicate a message to the President of the United States of America. He would put it on a boat. It would go, make it to San Francisco, go on a horse and buggy, then eventually hit a train, make it to Chicago, make it to DC, and the president would read that and send back a response. By the time the response got back to the emperor, everybody involved with the question would be dead. Saying this is not a very convenient way to practice diplomacy. So the role of being an ambassador is a Senate-confirmed position that has presidential powers. The role of the ambassador is to serve as the embodiment of the President of the United States of America, whichever country you represent, in that place that you are at. And from a pure technical perspective, the ambassador outranks everybody, including the vice president, other than the president, while in country. Now, practically, it doesn't happen when the Secretary of State comes. The Secretary of State outranks him, but from a technical perspective, it's the ambassador's shot. He has what's called Chief of Mission Authority. It's a very big deal. And what would happen is that historically, embassies were always placed in the capital of the other country. And that had happened in pretty much every example. And you've got large countries. So within countries that have embassies, you also have consulates. And consulates are basically like branches of the embassy. And they would service many of the things that have to happen in that country, because geography requires that you have consulates, various different places. And the head of that consulate is called the consul general. And every consul general in the world reports up to the ambassador, who has chief of mission authority for the entire country, except for two places when we got to Israel. Hong Kong, the consul general of Hong Kong does not report up to the ambassador at the embassy in Beijing. And the consul general in Jerusalem did not work for, did not communicate with, and did not report up to the ambassador who sat in Tel Aviv, Israel. Something fascinating to note, which is not political at all from Republican, Democrat, just when you have large unwieldy organizations, how things become entrenched within them. Many years before the ambassador and I got there, there was a fist fight in between a political officer from the embassy in Tel Aviv and a political officer from the consulate in Jerusalem, and I believe it was Mevaseret Zion. And they both wanted to go to a meeting, and they were debating over jurisdiction. And Mevaseret Zion is a suburb of Jerusalem, so Tel Aviv says, it's Israel, it's ours. And Jerusalem says, it's Jerusalem, it's ours. And they got into a fist fight in front of this meeting, and obviously neither of them made it into the meeting. I believe both of them got sent home. It's a little bit apocryphal, but there's a lot of truth behind that specific story. And there's a lot of animosity, not because of politics, but because of built-in bureaucracy in between the two buildings. So one of the first things that the ambassador wanted to do is say, well, let's take one step back. The waiver, the very first waiver that the president had to sign was on January 21st, 2017. I think most of you know what he was doing on January 20th, 2017. And there was a strong feeling that perhaps he would go ahead and not sign the waiver, and he would recognize Jerusalem on January 21st. It was a campaign promise, and they felt that President Trump, as many things, bold is definitely one of them, and he would go ahead and do that. To his credit, to the credit of Jared, to the credit of my boss, to the credit of the vice president, they had the humility to say that perhaps what we say on this side, see on this side of the desk is not what you can see on the other side of the desk. We don't have ambassadors in most of the relevant countries. Our data and our intel perhaps needs to be looked at again by our people, and we're not ready to make this decision. So they didn't make a decision. There was a collective groan from the pro-Israel community. This guy's just like every other president. And then the next waiver comes along in June of 2017, and there was time to study, and we had ambassadors in place, and we had the data, and we had the intel, and the president signed the waiver. And you go back and read the articles that happened in June. There was disappointment across the aisle. In fact, 91-0, the Senate condemned the president for signing the waiver. 91-0. Look at what the Senate has agreed upon unanimously during this presidency, and it's not a lot of things. And so the ambassador and the president and the White House said, let's address this before we get to December, which is when the next waiver is up. And that story is not mine to tell. That's the ambassador and the presidents and the vice president. You can read a little bit about it in Nikki Haley's book. It certainly is partly her story as well. Very articulately described. I think chapter 7, I've read it more than once. This was all encompassing. Really all-encompassing for my boss. So much so he was in D.C. for a month litigating this, and I had to fulfill his roles here. I'm a middle child, so I'm used to disappointing people when I walk into the room when they're expecting Ambassador David Friedman, and they wind up with Aryeh Lightstone. It's certainly back then, nobody really knew who I was. So December 6th, December 5th at night, Governor Rick Scott was at the ambassador's house for a Florida-Israel Chamber of Commerce event. And it was a secret what was going to happen the next day. And our security people turned to his security people, said, by the way, this is going to happen. We have an elevated sense of security. And there was concern. His security people were ready to put him on a plane and take him home.
Wow.
And Governor Scott walks into the room to the ambassador and says, what should I do? And the ambassador and Governor Scott said, well, it depends. Are you leading or are you following? And Governor Scott says, I'm leading. And he stayed, and he was in Jerusalem that entire next day, and I went with him. And the following morning, December 7th at 7 a.m., I went to go meet with him and a couple other people. And I was the first diplomat in all of U.S. history to welcome people to Jerusalem, Israel. And what a kavod. So that was fascinating, that announcement. And then comes the embassy opening. It is not a secret that Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State at the time, was not a big fan of my boss. He wasn't a big fan of the embassy decision, wasn't a big fan of the Jerusalem decision. And he had sent a proposal to the president that was going to take many, many years and many hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to build. And he sent it to the president. The president called up the ambassador. I was in the car with the ambassador on that time that the president called, which, by the way, is a lot of fun when the president calls. He calls and he walks through with the ambassador what had been pitched by the Secretary of State's office. And the ambassador says, 12 years seems like a long time to wait to build an embassy in Jerusalem. Do you think MBS, when he wants to build an embassy someplace, he has to do an RFP with an RFI and then build it out to 17 contractors. And in 23 years, MBS can go ahead and have his embassy in the place that he wants. That's a classic sort of Middle East approach to realpolitik. And the president goes, well, what can we do? The ambassador says, well, we've got a building in Arnona, beautiful building, built in the 2000s, meets all the safety requirements. For about $200,000, I can turn it into an embassy for you. What do you think? The president goes, we will go with that idea. And we sit in the car, we're driving to Jerusalem. Again, we used to have all of our meetings on the King David porch because we didn't have another office at that point in time in Jerusalem. And the ambassador goes, Aryeh, when are we going to do it? I said, I did not just tell the president we can get this done in a matter of months. What do you think? He says, May 14th. May 14th is the right time. It's 70 years to the date that Israel announced that it was going to be Israel. And 11 minutes later, Harry Truman recognized Israel. And we're going to correct a 70-year wrong, where we did not allow Israel to be the one country in the world, or we made Israel the one country in the world that doesn't get to choose its own capital. And at 4:11 p.m. on May 14th, you were there, 2018, we opened up an embassy in Jerusalem. You want a cool behind-the-scenes story?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So this was that morning, May 14th, I showed up as it was a real big production. I believe that at one point in time, it was rated the largest security threat in the entire Middle East. When you're ranking security threats, you want to be bowling, not golfing. You're rooting for a high number, not a low number. And we were a top 3 for sure. And it was the first time that my driver had been there, so he was using Waze. And Waze sends us to the American consulate in Jerusalem. And I was crushed because I'm like, oh, I know what's going to happen at 6 p.m. We're going to have the celebratory dinner. And somebody's going to come up to me, put their arm on my shoulder and say, Google doesn't acknowledge that this is actually the embassy. It's just a show. You switched the sign. You got to get it built into all this stuff. So I called. We've got pretty proficient tech people in the State Department. Can you call Google and see if you can get this fixed by 4 p.m. today? They're like, no. We put in a work order. It takes somewhere in between 6 and 18 months. I said, I cannot deal with the pro-Israel community for 6 to 18 months on having to put an American consulate to show up to their embassy in Jerusalem. It's just not something I can tolerate. And I'll leave the protagonist of the story anonymous in case she wants to out herself later. But there's a very lovely friend of mine who was extremely pro-Israel and extremely excited about this, and picked up her family to come to the embassy opening. And she happens to be a very significant person in the tech world. And my job, 20 minutes before the embassy opening, was to accommodate the other 8 guests that Prime Minister Netanyahu decided to bring that he did not clear with us. This was not an auditorium. It wasn't a stadium. There weren't extra chairs. So I literally have a guy in the back out of wood manufacturing chairs so I can put people in, and I'm trying to move people around and everything else like that. Where can my kids sit on people's laps? I mean, this is the high level diplomacy that I was dealing with at that point in time. You remember the heat. It was very hot. I'm running up and down the stairs. I obviously look like a Nachschlepper, if you will. And she turns to me and says, Aryeh, I just want to help you. She's the CEO of a Fortune 10 company. You don't, thank you. You enjoy. Spend time here. Run up and down the stairs again. She goes, Aryeh, I just want to help you. I'm like, just have fun. Watch my kids. I got it. And finally, the third time on the stairs, she goes, I want to help you. So I'm like, you want to help me? This is what you can do. Said, I pulled up to the embassy this morning, and Waze said that you've arrived at the American consulate. Said, that bothers me tremendously. She goes, it bothers me tremendously. I said, you're in the tech world. Do you think you can get that fixed? She goes, what time is it? It's 3:37. Said, when do you need that fixed by? I said, well, the next time somebody's going to show up to the American consulates, into the American embassies, when the buses pull up in an hour and 10 minutes. She goes, I got it. She called and she woke up the CEO of Google and said, I need this done. Wow. And it got done in, I don't know, 50 minutes. I mean, it was just it was just a fun thing to have accomplished. It's a day that will live on in so many of our hearts forever, and it's just been a tremendous amount of joy and excitement to myself and everybody who's involved.
It's a great story. We have so much to talk about in so little time because I know
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I'm sorry because I know how close to Shabbos it is. I could speak to you for the next 5 hours on our end, but I want to get to some other topics. So first of all, it was an amazing day, and you should know from the participant perspective, it ran as smoothly as you could imagine. No one saw any running to get extra chairs. So it was an extraordinary day. The place, the people, and the cause, the reason we were there, as you said, it will forever live on in our memories. But my oldest daughter was born in Jerusalem. She was born in Shaare Zedek Hospital. I was in Grus Kollel, finishing my rabbinic ordination at the time. And her passport until today says Jerusalem. It doesn't say Israel. Now that the embassy is in Jerusalem, now that the United States has recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, where's the State Department on that? I know there was a famous lawsuit. I believe it went up to the Supreme Court, and it was not changed. When will my daughter's passport reflect that Jerusalem is indeed the capital of Israel? What can we do to make that happen?
So it's a great question, and that's sort of like I'm different, but putting in Waze and showing up to the consulate and not the embassy. And that was the first question that we got. And that question really goes back to the president's proclamation, December 6, 2017. He did not use 2 words. He did not use eternal, and he did not use undivided. Now, he didn't use those 2 words, not because he doesn't believe that Jerusalem should be eternal, and not because he believes that it shouldn't be undivided. He believes, and has from the very first day he took office, he believes that peace is possible in the region. And what he did not want to do was to box Israel into a corner that Israel would not box out of. His philosophy has been, since the very beginning, and this emanates from him, but has gone down the entire White House, from Mr. Kushner to Ambassador Friedman, to Avi Berkowitz, to Jason Greenblatt, the Vice President, Secretary of State Pompeo now. Israel is older than more than half the countries in the UN. Israel is a great friend. Let's treat it like a peer and not like a little brother. So Israel needs to make decisions that it's going to wind up making, and we should be supportive, like a great friend. This particular issue was a setup for the unveiling of the vision for peace. In that, Abu Dis is envisioned as possibly part of a capital of a Palestinian state along the vision for peace, as that may or may not come to fruition. We all pray for peace. Certainly on Yom Yerushalayim, we pray for peace extensively and meaningfully. And what the president did not want to do is to get into the business of calling out the borders of Jerusalem. So, correct. If you are in Jerusalem, you are in Israel. Where in Jerusalem you have a baby, it happens to be, that's a legal issue that we have in our State Department. It would be resolved through the implementation of either the mapping committee or the vision for peace. But we thought that was very much a tail wagging the dog issue when it came to having the politics in the grander region. If we got into where we were drawing the lines, we felt that we were going to be getting into negotiations about things that we have no business negotiating about. We fully support Israel's recognition of all of the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, but we're also confused by the security barrier that runs right down the half. So I'm not sure if I presume she was not born in the Shuafat refugee camp, right. But if one were born in the Shuafat refugee camp, would Israel consider that part of Jerusalem, part of Israel? Israel's itself confused by that.
So we shouldn't anticipate that changing until there's more progress made in terms of this peace plan.
No, I would anticipate that changing in some way. I want to be very careful in terms of anticipate. It is an issue that this administration is dearly aware of. It's on the let's get clarification for that in the not too distant future.
So let's turn the conversation a little bit. Really, at the beginning of this administration, Vice President Pence held something that I don't think had happened before. There had been Hanukkah gatherings at the White House. There had been Jewish Heritage Month of May gatherings. He held a Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration, and I had the great privilege of being there. And I was there with some colleagues and friends. And anytime you're in the White House, it's such a privilege. It's really, so few people get to do it. You end up lingering. You like to hang out. You want to savor as long as you can. I'm always one of the last people to leave. You just want to draw the experience out as much as you can. So I was standing with a few friends, and Ambassador Friedman walked by. I was with a few rabbis, and he stopped, and he looked at all of us, and he said, "Chevra, what are you waiting for? The Kiddush? It's over." And I thought to myself, what a different administration. There were Jared and Ivanka, right? Jared, who obviously grew up an Orthodox Jew, and Ivanka, and they're very committed, observant Jews. Here was an ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who's a Hamish, a reference to a Kiddush. It felt like he was hanging out in his hometown of the Five Towns. It was a little bit of a different feel for an administration in terms of the comfort level of Jews being there, on the one hand. On the other hand, you and I have spoken about, while I think it's undeniable that this president has been outstanding for Israel in unprecedented ways and ranks among the best, if not the best friend Israel has had, and we can go out and delineate and make that argument, there are other aspects of the administration which are challenging to identify with or associate with, certain ways of speaking, certain ways of behaving, which are not consistent with what you and I learned in rabbinical school and our Torah values. So when you had this opportunity to become a senior advisor to the ambassador, when you had the opportunity to take on this role of diplomacy representing the administration, did you hesitate? Was there that duality? On the one hand, a place where an observant Jew can feel so comfortable, a Hamish environment. On the other hand, questions of associating with the whole package. And how do you continue to do with that now, as much as you've contributed and will go down in history? As you shared some of these behind-the-scenes stories, you will go down in history in having played a role in some of these historic milestones for Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship. But has that been a concern of yours, and how do you balance it? And will you talk to me ever again after I've asked that question?
Now, first of all, you, me, and hopefully everybody else listening on this is we're thinking people, and there are very few decisions in life that are black and white. I'll disagree with some of the sort of the assumptions involved with the question, but the question is a great question. Anytime you go work for anybody or any entity, you have to go ahead and check to see, does this adhere to whatever your checklist is. And I would assume that Torah Values is number one on our checklist. There's what's the compensation, what's it like for the family. I'll just give you a good example on a micro and then on a macro. On a micro level, this was the wrong time for my family to take this job. I worked very hard for Marco Rubio when he was running for president. When he dropped out, my family was very excited to meet me again. I was excited to spend money on actually my family and charities that don't go away, like campaigns. And had reintroduced myself to my family. We had just had a new baby. I had just bought a new business. We had just bought a new house. And when I say just, within 1 week of being offered this position, I had done all of this the week beforehand. And when you make any one of those decisions, you normally have anchored yourself in a meaningful way. When you do 3 of those decisions, you've anchored yourself in a very significant way. And so much so, I came back on a Thursday on the Acela with the ambassador, working on the confirmation hearing, and we had some terrible meetings. I mean, terrible meetings in DC that day. And we're joking around on the Amtrak on the way back, trying to relax. And he said, when you went to go see Marco, I went to go see the president. I said, okay. How'd that go? He said, well, the president had asked him to be part of the peace team as well. The president's very interested in peace. And he'd like me to work with Jason Greenblatt and Jared Kushner on that team. So I turned to the president and said, it's the highest honor of my life. I'd love to be able to do that, but I need somebody else to help with the bilateral relationship between U.S. and Israel. It's very difficult to do both of those on your own. And the president says, bring whoever you want. So I turned to the ambassador and I said, that's really fantastic. We normally Israel's never had a true political appointee before, and it's never had a true second political appointee. There are normally 6 or 7 embassies throughout the world who get a second political appointee. So it's very rare to have a senior advisor or chief of staff in any embassy, and it's never happened in Israel beforehand. And the ambassador says, I'm going to take you. So I said, that's fantastic. Who's going to tell my wife? And he knew the challenges that we had been going through, and opportunity, beautiful thing, beautiful baby, beautiful home, beautiful business, all of those things, but all of them have responsibilities that go with them. And he goes, if you can convince your wife, you're probably qualified for Mideast peace. So I said, great, this will be that. There's no chance I'm telling my wife. I love her very much, and I intend to stay married to her forever. I'm not bringing this conversation up 6 days after we've had a baby, no chance. So I go home that night, and my wife sees it on my face. She goes, what happened? I said, nothing, don't worry about it. I'm not going to tell her. We go through Friday, I back to whatever the business is. Friday night dinner, we're having dinner. The kids go to sleep. They were much younger back then, and cuter. And she goes, what's on your mind? I said, look, Ambassador Friedman proposed this fantastic opportunity, but I can't think of a worse time for us right now. And we've lived by the philosophy of right time, right opportunity equals the right opportunity. Right opportunity at the wrong time, by definition, is the wrong opportunity. And you have to have enough fortitude to know when to turn something down. And she goes, I can't believe you brought this up. How could we, all the things that are going on. I said, just telling you, you know what I'm saying? I don't want you to be upset that I'm telling you. And we go to sleep that night, and she wakes up to feed the baby at some point in time in the night. And she goes, Aryeh, said, what? Said, maybe our philosophy in life has been wrong. Said, what do you mean? She goes, who are we to say what the right time is? If it's the right opportunity, how do you not grab that opportunity? And she goes, you should call the ambassador immediately after Shabbos and you tell them that we're in. And I mention that because I think that's correct. Who amongst us has an ego large enough to know what the right time is for any of us? Who does? And my wife's humility to acknowledge and to know that was tremendous. We would have missed this entire opportunity with that thing. And my big question over Shabbos was, do I bring it up with her again? Because, a lot of things going on 3 a.m. This is how I remember the conversation happening. So clearly it happened that way. Do I want to double check? And called him, and he goes, your wife said yes. And since then it's been full speed. I'll sort of answer the other question very directly. I've never worked for a greater mensch than Ambassador Friedman. There is nobody. Hi, Tara. Say hi. Yeah, this is Tara. She was the one who was just born at that point in time. No, okay. And she can say the rolling rate, which has made this entire move here pretty much the best thing ever. He is a mensch personified. They're like you said beforehand, most of the time, Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in a game, right? You remember that? So in the locker room afterwards, there was a guy named James somebody or other who was interviewed after the game, says, how are you going to remember this historic night? And James turns to the reporter and says, how am I going to remember this historic night? Let me tell you how I'm going to remember this historic night. Everybody's going to remember it as the night that Wilt and I combined to score 102 points, right? So that's what guys like me normally tell the stories, because you carry the bag and you're part of the thing and you're a fly on the wall and everything else like that. Ambassador Friedman has not made me feel for a half a second like James. He's made me feel like Scottie Pippen. He's made me feel an essential part of everything that's going on, which is a joke, because the relationship that we have is because he can pick up the phone and he can speak to the president, and the president picks up the phone and speaks to him. He's got a 15-year relationship with Jared, and that's what makes this relationship work. And I will tell you, out of every single time I've been in the room with the ambassador, with Jared, with the president, with the vice president, the secretary of state, I have seen conduct that I wish all of our not-for-profits had. I wish that they had the same concern. There are things that people say. I don't like the things that people say. You know that doesn't make any of us feel particularly great. But the way that I've seen people conduct themselves when nobody is looking, I wish that and I worked in a lot of not-for-profits, I wish that all of our chief executives conducted themselves with that level of menschlichkeit, and that goes from my boss, and it goes all the way up to his boss, the president. And it certainly goes to the vice president and to Jared and to Secretary Pompeo. And I know sometimes we feel that it's justifiable. We've had very challenging months. Our temper goes and whatever else it would be. You're looking at the 6 people in the world who have more pressure on their shoulders than any human being has ever had in the history of the world post Tanakh time. And they carry themselves with grace. And as a mensch, I don't like sometimes what people say. But as a chief executive, I've been very proud to work for.
Understood. Someone once told me, I think with a lot of wisdom, that sometimes you got to watch the sporting event with the sound on, sometimes with the sound off. And,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, and if you watch with the sound off, the policies, and particularly vis-a-vis Israel, they've really been wonderful. We just got to meet your daughter, beautiful. What's it been like for your family to live in Israel? At the end of the day, your wife pushed you and took that courageous decision, and I hope she didn't regret she made it at 3 a.m. and hasn't looked back either. I know from some of her social media statuses how excited she is to be in Israel and the pride she has in her children who are growing up in Israel, albeit in a U.S. diplomatic post, but obviously very connected as a Torah-observant family with the people of Israel, the land of Israel. What's it been like for them? What are some of the highlights of raising your children in Israel these past few years?
So the first thing is I came in and I assumed I was going to have the best job ever. And I was going to have to go ahead and take my smile and turn it into like neutral when I got home because, Aliyah was not in our plans. Moving to another country wasn't in our plans. Different schools, different family, different friends, different grocery stores, all of that stuff. Grocery store here is a contact sport, even during Corona, saying that this is, I thought that my wife and kids were going to be miserable and that I was going to be the happiest guy in the world. And the only way that we were going to make it through this is if that we lived at home in neutral. They would take the frown and turn it to neutral. I would take the smile and turn it to neutral. And it would be great. The first 9 months of the job, I lived with a permanent frown and they lived with a permanent smile on their faces. After we got through the first 2 days of school, which is very difficult, from day 3 on, my kids have flourished in a meaningful way. It doesn't mean that they don't have challenges. They have challenges in America. They have challenges wherever it goes, but the experiences they have had have been great. My wife has embraced every obstacle as an opportunity. And has managed to overcome most of them. And those that we haven't overcome, American Express doesn't hurt. And certainly the embassy is a great get out of jail free card for bureaucracy that could slow other people down. There's no doubt about that. But that part is great. Now I've caught up with them. I'm also enjoying the heck out of myself, you couldn't tell. So we all walk around with one of these silly grins on our face. But I'll give you just maybe 3 highlights. Highlight number 1 is 2 nights ago, my daughter, who is 9, did a Zoom for her class in Shalamis that she was with now 3 years ago on Yom Yerushalayim. And she did it in Hebrew and in English. And she did it about every place in Jerusalem that she had been to. And she explained what it meant to her. And, the parts of the Ir David that are only opened up for us, that my kids get to go through the day that the excavation is done. They get to dig at the excavation, that she got to hold Ivanka's hand at the embassy opening, that Kiva Lightstone got a bracha from former Chief Rabbi, Senior Rabbi Lau, that Rabbi Lau Senior gave my younger son Simcha his siddur at his siddur play. Wow. That Simcha Lightstone got to go to the after party, and Congressman Lee Zeldin asked him for his autograph, and not the opposite. We had dinner now several months ago with Governor Abbott, where the Prime Minister turned to Akiva and asked Akiva to sit at the table and join him. It's Governor Abbott and Mrs. Abbott and Mrs. Netanyahu and the Prime Minister just sitting there and asking how things are going. These are irreplaceable memories and moments, and they only exist because the ambassador and Tammy Friedman have included us as the core team, not the support staff, which I am. I'm happy to be the support staff as well, but as the core team. And there's nothing that we miss out on doing. And that includes my kids. My kids have been treated like their kids in terms of the experience for everything. There's a picture just as I'm looking at it at the wall. Let me sing the praises of my boss once more. On December 6, 2018 was the 1-year anniversary of the recognition of Jerusalem that the president had. So how do we celebrate that? How do you do that? So it happened to be the 4th night of Hanukkah. So I called the Prime Minister's office and said, can we light the Hanukkah candles together, the Prime Minister and the ambassador together at the wall? You know, when President Trump landed in Israel in May of 2017, nobody from Israel went to the wall with him. Not because they didn't want to go, but because U.S. policy, after not vetoing Resolution 2334, is that the Western Wall is occupied Palestinian territory, and therefore you can't go with a member of the Israeli government because that's recognizing some form of control over that. So we went from May not being able to have an Israeli official there to December 6th of 2018, the ambassador and the prime minister together lighting Hanukkah candles at the wall, which was awesome. So why is that singing the praise of my ambassador? I planned the event, and to me it was very meaningful. And the ambassador said, bring your parents. They were in town for Hanukkah. They are in town always, which is great. We're always happy to have them and my in-laws, which has been a tremendous blessing. And we're at the wall with my kids. And the prime minister is late, which for him is early. And the ambassador turns and says, do you want to be the answer to a Jeopardy question one day? I said, sure. What answer to the Jeopardy question? He goes, this will be the first time that the prime minister of Israel, any prime minister of Israel, has ever been to the Western Wall with any Western diplomat. How about you go greet him at the wall?
Wow.
I went with my family. There's a picture over there on the mantle with my family lined up, waiting to greet the prime minister. And we're the first diplomatic family to ever do that, which was great. And the best part of that was Simcha, who was maybe 5 at the time. So prime minister is shaking everybody's hands, the whole thing. And he goes to shake Simcha's hand, and Simcha's Hebrew is better than all of ours in the family. And the prime minister turns down to him, and Simcha doesn't shake his hand. I'm like, this is a diplomatic incident. My 5-year-old's refusing to shake the hands of the Rosh HaMamshalah. And the prime minister turns to him and says, you don't want to shake my hand? And Simcha turns to him in a perfect Hebrew with the rolling ratios and says, my mind wants my hand to shake your hand, but my hand is not moving. And the prime minister goes down with his wrist, lifts it up like this, and goes like that. And we've got to capture on camera. Where else are you going to have that experience? So it's really been special, and all that credit goes to the Friedmans. Really, all of that credit goes.
Well, you're very kind for saying that. The truth is, Aryeh, you're very modest and humble. You alluded to earlier. But the truth is that the ambassador needed your help to get confirmed, your connections and your insight and your insider relationships. And so I'm sure he's just reciprocating that loyalty to help him be where he is, to be giving the opportunities where you are. And you're humble to say that, but we can share that. We've taken up already a lot of your time. Let me ask you one last question. Thank you so much again for being with us. It really enhances our Yom Yerushalayim, and thank you for sharing yours with us. What's next for you? We're so proud what you're doing, what you've done. I'm proud to call you a friend. And what's next for the Lightstone family? What's next for Aryeh Lightstone in the right time or the wrong time? Running for office, you've got the credentials, you've got the charisma, you've got the knowledge, you got the experience. Where are you taking your talents when this ends? And hopefully it won't end anytime soon for you. But what's next in store for you?
I will tell you, if you read the second half of Ambassador Friedman's interview with the Jerusalem Post 2 weeks ago, sort of the May 14th edition, it was the Friday before that, people think that we're done enhancing the U.S.-Israel relationship. We are so far from done. The relationship is really at first base. There are components of it, security, intel, that are better than we have with any other country in the world. And I made this crack at AIPAC, but it's not a crack. It really is our policy. The U.S.-Israel relationship, if we want to call it a special relationship that's the envy of the world, it needs to be more reciprocal, and it needs to be greater. We have so much to do. We have so much to do in order to enhance that. Until we get that to where this relationship is safeguarded for the next 100 years, I have not thought. I haven't thought and will not think about anything else, because everything else, I joke, and it's probably true. I peaked professionally on May 14th, 2018. Everything after that is what can we do in order to do what I think is the most important thing that I'll ever do with my life. How do you strengthen the country, the United States of America, which is the greatest country in the history of the world, the greatest force for good that exists out there? Now we're fighting that. We're losing parts of that. We need to make it stronger. And that's where the clergy and your congregants and everybody listening here can do. And I'm going to leave you with a to-do list. But I've got my to-do list. And until I'm done with that to-do list, I'm not doing anything. Not even thinking about doing anything. In the meantime, my kids are growing and advancing and succeeding, and my wife, the same thing. But this relationship, for people who say, haven't we done enough? We haven't started. We have not started. And it's important to know, I'm not doing it for Israel, although Aryeh Lightstone, a private citizen, would do this for Israel, and I would fight for that. This is for America. To be the America that we need to be for the next 50 years, we need to be closer to Israel, not further apart. There needs to be zero daylight, and that's not just security and intel. That's artificial intelligence. It's 5G. It's cyber. It's robotics. If you ask the NSA director, Robert O'Brien, who is a wonderful hero of the United States of America, who he speaks to most during this corona crisis, he speaks to Meir Ben Shabbat here in Israel. Doesn't mean this is where all the solutions are going to come from, but this is where the future is coming from. And the U.S. and Israel need to be more closely linked together in all of those aspects. None of you will ever read about it. None of you will ever care about it. But if we're sitting here as the two superpowers in the world in 50 years from now, it'll be because of the stuff that you haven't read about and you might not care about. And we're working on that. Can I leave you with a Yom Yerushalayim message?
Absolutely, please.
Right now, all I see is you. So, and I'm happy just to talk to you. I'm hoping other people are listening. Some of them might even not be related to me, which is possible. Who knows? All of you are going to decide how to spend your money as we recover from this. Philanthropically, supporting your neighbors, which is absolutely so incredibly critical. And with leadership like Rabbi Goldberg, whatever he guides you, he'll guide you. I'm going to make I'm going to put on my rabbinical hat for just one moment. It's Meiser money, from my perspective, after you've taken care of your community, to book your next vacation to Israel. It is Meiser money to book your next vacation to go someplace in the United States of America that's turning. It's Meiser money to do that. There's not a doubt in my mind. The economies need to be rebuilt. We need to take care of our brothers and sisters. And from where we're sitting on this screen, that's businesses in the United States of America and as businesses here in Israel. And there's only one way that we're going to rebuild that. And that's when we are comfortable on our own to be able to go out and we've taken care of the core necessities of health and food of our neighbors and our friends and our family and our yeshivas and our schools, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you've got great leadership who will prioritize that. Make it your list. If you were planning on going to Israel in 2 years, be there this year. If you were planning on going on vacation, don't go to Europe. Don't go to South America. Don't go to Mexico. Don't go to Canada. They're all great places. You can expand your horizons. But here you can expand your horizons and make a difference to the two countries that need you most right now. You have to do it. And
when will we get let back into Israel? Anytime soon?
Great question.
We're ready to come. We're ready to come. Let us in.
Great question. I anticipate, look, Israel is very concerned about a second wave, as I think everybody is. Israel has done a very good job managing this first wave. We pray every day that there's not a second one. They are begging. Can I say this? I'll deny it, but I'll say it. One of the reasons that Israel has not made sort of side agreements with other countries that have greater, at least superficial success against Corona right now in order to be able to come, as many other smaller countries are doing right now. Israel does not want to move without a strategic relationship with the U.S. on how we recover from this together. That is when the Prime Minister says Israel has no greater friend than America, and America has no greater friend than Israel. That's one of the ways that's indicative of how Israel really views America. I mean, it's so incredibly powerful in that regard. So I anticipate mid-June there should be some news. I hope it'll be positive. But people are watching to see what happens in the test the next 10 days as they make those decisions. So I urge you, don't book anything for June right now. But when you're looking later this summer, this fall, if you can spend chagim, whatever else it would be, my argument is it would be ma'aser money to be able to do that. And in the meantime, and you have the means and you have the time, there are plenty of places in America that need your support as well. I would strongly encourage you to go ahead and do that.
We will take that message. We appreciate it. Rabbi Aryeh Lightstone, thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your devotion and dedication to both the U.S. and Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship. Wishing you a good Shabbos, a Chag Sameach, a happy Yom Yerushalayim, a good Yontif for Shavuos next week. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for giving us your time.
To you and to all of yours. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, good Chodesh, all of the things that the normal senior advisor at an embassy would normally say.
Thank you so much. Take care. Be well.